there were plenty of reasons he felt Ukraine needed them, the most important of which being that the country's current crop of fighters simply wasn't fit for the task of taking on Russia. Why? All were Soviet-era platforms that had come from Russia during the days when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, with most falling well short of what Russia is capable of sending into the skies. Ukraine's stocks included 43 MiG-29s. While far from the worst aerial platform in the world, the MiG-29 was developed in the 1970s along with the Su-27, of which Ukraine had 26. It entered service in 1983, almost a decade before the collapse of the Soviet Union, and was designed as a multi-role fighter capable of flying for almost 1,500 miles before needing to refuel. In addition to the MiG-29 and Su-27s, Ukraine had 12 Su-24s and 17 Su-25s, which are even older jets. You're likely already seeing a couple of problems with this fleet. Beyond the age of the flight platforms, which could give them limited survivability especially if they had already logged a large number of flight hours, Ukraine's Soviet-era jets were made by Russia. That means Moscow would understand precisely what they were capable of, meaning it could create suitable countermeasures to make them almost a non-factor in the Ukraine war. And that's what we've seen so far. Though Russia's attempts to establish aerial dominance have been faltering at best, with the country losing 368 planes so far during the Ukraine war according to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Ukraine hasn't been able to counter that. It can't. Its platforms are too old and too familiar, meaning they've been relegated to serving an occasional defensive role against the Russian advance. Add to that the size difference between the country's air forces. Ukraine has around 72 fighter jets to Russia's 809, and you have a serious problem for Ukraine. It didn't have the quality of planes it needed and, frankly, couldn't compare to the numbers Russia could bring to bear. That's why Zelensky was so adamant that Ukraine needed the F-16s, which he viewed as being superior to almost anything Russia was fielding as well as offering the versatility needed for Ukraine to establish pockets of aerial dominance. However, the US, which produces the F-16, didn't want to send any. In February 2023, Slate published an article in which it explained the reasons why the American President Joe Biden was so reluctant to send F-16s, or even approve the sending of these fighters by any other country, to Ukraine. The first reason was practical. Ukraine simply wasn't ready to receive them. The F-16 is a complex aerial platform that differs enormously from the Soviet-era fighters Ukraine's pilots were using. This would not be a case of pilots simply jumping from one platform to another. Extensive training, taking at least 6 months, would be needed before Ukraine could even field any F-16s it received. Add to this the maintenance issues surrounding the F-16. Their complexity compared to old Soviet platforms means they require almost daily maintenance, with the multi-role fighters systems being so delicate that they require pristine airfields to function. Ukraine has precious few of these airfields. The US argued, and those it does have could become targets for Russian bombs that would force constant repairs that kept the F-16s out of the sky. Finally, there was the red line issue. Biden was so hesitant to send F-16s to Ukraine because doing so could be a provocation that would push Putin into escalation. The crux of the issue seems to lie with the F-16's range. Being capable of striking a target from 500 miles away could mean that Ukraine would want to use the fighters to attack Russia on its own territory. Putin could consider the mere presence of F-16s in Ukraine as a threat to his country, which could provoke him into launching a wider war against the US or other NATO members. Zelensky presented counterpoints to these arguments. Several red lines have already been crossed, with Putin doing little more than echoing the hollow threats he'd been making since the beginning of the Ukraine war. As for escalation, Zelensky could argue that Putin did that the moment he sent Russian troops into his country. What more did the West need to see? To Ukraine's president, providing F-16s would allow Ukraine to better fight against the Russians, thus reducing the possibility of an escalation. It took a long time, but Zelensky's arguments won out in the end. Serhiy Golubtsov, the chief of aviation of Ukraine's Air Force, had constantly argued that Ukraine needed to receive 4 operational squadrons of F-16s to take control of just a single sector of the 700-mile war front. After a year of intensive diplomacy, according to Forbes, those 4 squadrons would finally arrive. They wouldn't be provided by the US. Sending F-16s into Ukraine was considered too much of a provocation by the White House, but America had permitted its European allies to provide F-16s of their own. Enter Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands, which stepped up to collectively pledge 85 F-16s to Ukraine. Forbes says that would be enough for Ukraine to sustain its training unit in Romania, which is now using 18 ex-Dutch F-16s to bring its pilots up to snuff, as well as provide 4 squadrons of the multi-role fighters, with each squadron being 16 F-16s strong. Granted, Ukraine wouldn't be receiving all of these F-16s at once. The first 6 arrived in August 2024, with further deliveries to be staggered throughout 2024 and 2025. Still, Zelensky had his wish. Ukraine finally had access to F-16s. And with the first batch of Ukrainian pilots graduating from F-16 training programs just 3 months prior to the receipt of the first 6 of these fighters, Ukraine would finally be able to bolster its aerial threat. Footage of the first F-16s to arrive in Ukraine emerged in August 2024, with Zelensky proudly standing in front of his country's new jets to proclaim that we did it. And that first glimpse provided eagle-eyed experts with a chance to see that Ukraine's F-16s were far from standard. There was something different about them. A few things, in fact, with each difference being an improvement that would allow these Ukrainian F-16s to counter Russia in surprising ways. So, what do we know about Ukraine's new F-16s? We'll start with the standard specifications. Surprisingly, the F-16 Fighting Falcon has a history that stretches back almost as far as the MiG-29s, which is considered outdated. The first variation of the F-16, the F-16A, debuted in January 1979 after a little over 2 years of development. This was followed by the F-16B, which featured tandem cockpits rather than the F-16A's single cockpit. And by November 1981, the US was already implementing a series of improvements that included built-in structural and wiring provisions, along with a new systems architecture. These improvements eventually led to the creation of the F-16C and F-16D, with practically all F-16A and F-16B having been converted to these improved versions. Since the multi-role fighter is built by Lockheed Martin, with the jet being capable of producing 27,000 pounds of thrust. An F-16 is a little over 49 feet long, with a wingspan of almost 33 feet. And the jet has a maximum takeoff weight of 37,500 pounds when accounting for fuel and armaments. The jet can reach a top speed of 1,500 miles per hour, which is around twice the speed of sound and somewhat equivalent to the MiG-29. It also has a 50,000-foot ceiling, with a range of 2,002 miles, which is around 500 miles more than Ukraine's previous best fighter jet. But where the F-16 truly stands out is in its weaponry. The jet can locate its targets in any type of weather and comes equipped with two types of powerful missiles, the AIM-9 Sidewinder and the AIM-120 AMRAAM. The Sidewinder is an air-to-air heat-seeking missile that can reach supersonic speeds and lock onto an opposing aircraft's engine to take it out with a high-explosive warhead. As for the AMRAAM, it's also an air-to-air missile, with its biggest advantage being that it can be fired from beyond visual range. A target won't even know it's coming until it's too late thanks to the missile's 20-mile range and supersonic speeds. Combine all of this with an M61A 120mm multi-barrel cannon, which comes with 500 rounds as standard, and you have a multi-role fighter that's still capable of tackling most aerial threats despite its age. But that's all par for the course for the F-16. Ukraine's F-16s have all of these features, but they also come packed with several others that make them very different from the standard American versions of the F-16. You could even say that Ukraine has received F-16s on steroids, which brings us to the next part of the video, just what makes Ukraine's F-16s so strange. We start with the pylons. On August 26, 2024, the Millennium 7 History Tech YouTube channel noted that examinations of the F-16s in Ukraine revealed they use two types of pylons. The first is the Pylon Integrated Dispensing System Plus, or PIDS Plus, with the other being the Electronic Combat Integrated Pylon System, or ESIPS Plus. The former appears to be mounted on the port side of Ukraine's F-16s, with the latter on the starboard side. On their own, these pylons aren't especially unique. They both appear to be upgraded over the older PIDS and ESIPS systems, but they serve a similar role. Both PIDS and ESIPS are installations that provide Ukraine's F-16 with additional capacity, adding extra tanks for fuel, as well as guided weapons, and a host of systems that improve the aircraft's operation and survivability. Both are military standard 1760 NATO compliant, which is essentially for allowing the utilities stored in them to interface with the F-16. In other words, a lack of compliance means that Ukraine's F-16s would be unable to fire weapons or use any of the defensive systems that can be installed into these pylons. Each of these pylons provides either a 28-volt DC connection or a 155 to 200-volt AC connection, allowing power to be supplied to the systems installed into the pylon. They also have both main and auxiliary power buses, with the latter being essential to keeping the pylon operational if an enemy attack takes out the main power bus. The pylons also feature a military standard 1553 data bus connection, which allows them to exchange data between the F-16s onboard computer and the computers that control the fighter's weapons systems. These pylons alone are not what make Ukraine's F-16s so special. Yes, they're upgrades over the standard PIDS and ESIPS pylons. But it's what's installed in those pylons that are so fascinating, the pods. Millennium 7 points out that the Ukrainian F-16 pylons look different than usual thanks to the presence of a strange pod that isn't included in the jet standard specifications. This is a self-protection pod created by the Danish company Thereâ that offers Ukraine's F-16s some very interesting capabilities. Each of these pods can track radio frequency and infrared missile threats, essentially acting as an early warning system for the F-16's pilot. In addition to this tracking, the pods can automatically deploy some of the F-16's countermeasures, such as its infrared flares and chaff, which are designed to throw incoming fire off target. The flares serve as decoys for incoming missiles, providing an alternative target for the missile that protects the F-16 from being struck. Thereâ's pods include these flares at the front and rear, allowing them to be deployed, regardless of where a threat may emerge. As for the chaff, that involves a release of masses of glass fibers coated in aluminum that are ejected from cartridges before spreading throughout the air to confuse an enemy's radar system. They're vital when attempting to fly past anti-air defensive systems, such as Russia's S-300 and S-400. Neither countermeasure is new to the F-16. What is new is the automation that the Theâ pods provide. At their heart lies the Untitled Electronic Warfare Management System, which provides constant updates related to the health and status of the F-16s and automatically deploys the aircraft's countermeasures. Think of it as a management system that handles many of the F-16's defensive measures, allowing the pilot to focus on flying and striking their target. Best of all, the pods are small and lightweight. With a diameter of just 1 foot and being just 6.5 feet in length, they can easily be attached to the PIDs and ESOPs and pylons without taking up room that could be used by other weapon systems and without adding unnecessary weight that could affect the craft's in-air survivability. In fact, a single pod weighs just 55 pounds, though this is without accounting for cabling and the countermeasure equipment loaded into the pod. Taken alone, these pods would already be useful additions to the F-16. They're capable of detecting and diverting incoming threats, enabling safer passage to a target. However, there's something else that Millennium 7 spotted in its examination of Ukraine's F-16s. The N/AAR-60 missile warning system. Also loaded onto the pylons, the N/AAR-60 system features 6 sensors, according to Millennium 7, with each one having a 115-degree field of view. The channel notes that there appear to be 3 of these sensors installed on the PIDs and pylon of a Ukrainian F-16s, with the other 3 on the ESOPs Plus. Collectively, these sensors provide a 360-degree warning system that operates in a full sphere rather than on a 2D plane. The sensors pick up on ultraviolet radiation at frequencies outside solar emissions, meaning they can't be confused by general sunlight and can thus operate in any weather conditions. Why does this matter? Approaching missiles generate an exhaust plume, which contains ultraviolet radiation. So, the N/AAR-60 is able to detect that plume so it can notify both the F-16 pilot and the aircraft's systems of an incoming threat. As Millennium 7 points out, there's a trade-off with these UV detection systems. While they don't offer the same sort of range as infrared detection systems, they are more accurate, meaning they deliver fewer false positives and thus create a more realistic view of what's incoming in the F-16's airspace. The system's developer, the German company Hensoldt, offers more details. It notes that an estimated 500,000 shoulder-fired surface-to-air, or SAM, missiles exist in the world. Many aircraft losses are the result of these passive missiles, with the N/AAR-60 having been created to counteract that threat. The Block 2 variant of its N/AAR-60 system, which is the one that Millennium 7 speculates is present on the Ukrainian F-16s, is durable enough to last for more than 14,000 flight hours, which far exceeds the lifespan of the F-16 frame itself, and is capable of reporting up to 8 threats simultaneously, and over 150 threats over the course of its lifespan. The N/AAR-60 requires no cooling, meaning it can operate constantly, and it weighs just 4.4 pounds, meaning its effect on the F-16's total weight is minuscule. Hensoldt also offers more details about the system's UV detection capabilities. It notes that the Block 2 variant of the system is optimized to detect the radiation signature in the UV solar blind spectral band, allowing it to not only detect incoming missiles but indicate their direction at the maximum warning time available to the pilot. The sensors also use non-moving parts, which makes them mechanically sound and unlikely to be jarred by standard F-16 operations. That's a big plus for Ukraine. It means minimal maintenance is required. Being installed on the PIDS and ESOPs and pilots also means that the N/AAR-60 is compatible with other NATO compliance systems, such as the pods we previously mentioned. So, Ukraine's F-16s are more capable of detecting incoming threats than standard F-16s. And due to this compatibility between systems, it appears that Ukraine's F-16s can also use their N/AAR-60 systems to receive warnings about incoming missiles, with the pods automatically deploying countermeasures when needed. It all adds up to an impressive increase in the survivability of Ukraine's F-16s compared to the American standard versions of the aircraft. And there's even more. In addition to the N/AAR-60 system, Millennium 7 also identifies a radar jammer built into the Ukrainian F-16's pylons. This is the N/ALQ-162 jammer, produced by Northrop Grumman and also known as the Shadow Box. Like the pods and N/AAR-60, the N/AAR-60 system is designed to be as compact as possible, again allowing it to be installed without weighing the F-16 down or getting in the way of the aircraft's weapon systems. Millennium 7 says the Shadow Box is made up of a pair of small antennas, which are built into a single black box and operated automatically via a simple console built into the system. It's typically used in helicopters, with its purpose being precisely what is described, jamming. The Military Analysis Network provides more details. It says that the Shadow Box is capable of automatically scanning for threat signals and will generate countermeasures as soon as those signals are found. These include the titular radar jamming, which protects the aircraft from SAM and airborne missiles that use continuous wave or CW radar as part of their guidance systems. That covers both the S-300 and S-400 anti-air defense systems Russia has installed around the front lines, meaning the Shadow Box can protect Ukraine's F-16s from several of the most prominent SAM threats Russia presents. Jamming is initiated as soon as the Shadow Box validates the CW signals it picks up. As for which jamming signals are sent out, that depends on those pre-programmed into the Shadow Box before the F-16 takes to the skies. So, Ukraine can counter multiple types of CW radars, with the decisions likely being made on the ground based on what threats Ukraine believes its F-16s will face. A control panel is located inside the F-16's cockpit that allows the pilot to manually deploy the jamming signal, though the Shadow Box can also integrate with other defensive systems to allow for automatic jamming based on the threats those systems detect. It all adds up to create a triple threat of defensive systems that aren't available in a standard F-16. With these systems, Ukraine's F-16s are better able to track incoming threats, be they SAM or air-to-air missiles, and can deploy countermeasures ranging from infrared flares and chaff to radar jamming to prevent those missiles from hitting their target. The pilot gets a better view of the entire aerial field and can take on riskier operations, with mitigating systems designed to improve survivability when confronting some of the chief threats that Russia presents. It's an impressive package, truly lending credence to the opinion that Ukraine's F-16s are like standard F-16s only on steroids. But wait, there's more. Along with the addition of these non-standard systems to its F-16s, Ukraine is also collaborating with the United States to bolster the electronic warfare capabilities of its fighter jets. This is according to the Warzone, or TWZ, which published a report on August 26 claiming that Ukraine will start passing data generated by its F-16s to the US, with the latter then using that data to refine and improve the electronic warfare capabilities of both countries. TWZ says that the US is working alongside Norway and Denmark, both part of the consortium that provided Ukraine's F-16s, to parse through this data and enable reprogramming of the F-16s systems. Interestingly, the 68th Electronic Warfare Squadron, or USE, which will be working on the project, says that the electronic capabilities being worked on aren't currently available in the US. So, it appears Ukraine and the US have a "we'll scratch your back if you scratch ours" relationship going. The data generated by Ukraine's F-16s will be useful to the US in developing this electronic warfare system, with Ukraine then benefiting from whatever the Americans come up with. It appears that whatever these electronic warfare concepts might be, they are going to be tied into the new systems installed in Ukraine's F-16s. The US Air Force says, relying on data provided by Denmark and Norway, then adapting new processes and approaches to the usual process. The team, referring to the 68th USE, was able to understand the system and start their work. If that comment sounds vague to you, it's because the US doesn't want to reveal whatever it's cooking up, likely to prevent Russia from deploying any countermeasures until the new electronic warfare systems are deployed. What is known is that the collaboration is far from the 68th USE standard operating procedures. That was revealed by the squadron's director. The fact that the team was able to figure out the system in 2 weeks and go in country with a partner to develop a best ever mission data file is unheard of and is thanks to the talent here in the squadron and in the wing, the director claims. That claim only raises more questions about precisely what type of systems the US and Ukraine are developing for Ukraine's F-16s. TWZ has some potential answers. It points out that an electronic warfare system needs to be capable of detecting, categorizing, and responding to waveforms if it's to work correctly. To do that, it must pull from data built into the system's threat library. To counteract this, TWZ says, operators using the sorts of systems that electronic warfare attacks are supposed to counter have adopted systems of switching between operating modes and frequency bands so those systems can't be a real beat on what they're doing. On top of that, an electronic warfare system needs to be constantly updated as new threats emerge, with their databanks evolving periodically. That's where this collaboration may come into play. Ukraine's F-16s are gathering data that allows for the updating of America's threat libraries. But, TWZ claims, the US military has also been working on ways to automate and accelerate various parts of the reprogramming processes electronic warfare systems undergo. That automation would allow for the pushing out of upgrades far faster, with TWZ speculating that a good system might even be able to upgrade the systems of an aircraft that's already in flight. That is the holy grail according to TWZ, an aircraft with an electronic warfare suite that can update in real time based on the data it's collecting about the enemy's systems. Why would that matter? Retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Craig Andrew provided an anecdotal example in 2023 when speaking to Air Force Times. He brought up the idea of an American F-35 that encounters an SA-20, which is the NATO name for Russia's S-300 anti-air system, to explain the limitations in current electronic warfare suites. We're looking at an SA-20. I know it's an SA-20. Intel says there's an SA-20 there, but now my jet doesn't ID it as such because that SA-20 is operating, potentially, in a war reserve mode that we haven't seen before. The result is a jet that's unable to use its electronic warfare suite to counteract the threat the SA-20 presents at the time. However, the F-35 can flag the object for troops on the ground, the colonel says. who can update and re-upload the data into the jet so it's capable of understanding what it's looking at and how to geolocate the threat. That would be close to the Holy Grail TWZ describes, with the only possible improvement being the elimination of the manual updating and re-uploading processes so that the F-35 systems can adapt to the SA-20 in real time. Could that be what Ukraine and the US, along with Denmark and Norway, are working on for Ukraine's F-16s? Right now, it's too early to tell. What we can say for certain is that Ukraine's F-16s are strange, in the sense that they incorporate a variety of defensive systems that aren't seen in standard F-16s. The combination of those systems already improves the aircraft's survivability. But if work is in progress to create the holy grail of electronic warfare systems at the same time, and that work is progressing as quickly as the US Air Force seems to believe, it's possible that Ukraine's F-16s may end up on something more than steroids. They'll be loaded with systems that can identify threats in real time, adapt to them, and deliver invaluable data to other F-16s and Ukrainian forces on the ground. We're left with one final question. What does all of this mean for the Ukraine war? As powerful as these new defensive systems are, they don't make Ukraine's F-16s invulnerable. We've seen that already, as Ukraine lost one of its F-16s on August 29, with the only information we have on that loss being that the F-16 was chasing a cruise missile when it went down. We still don't know if the crash was due to an enemy action, pilot error, or mechanical blip. Still, though Ukraine's F-16s are far from invulnerable, the addition of these new systems means that the jets now have ways to counter S-300, S-400, and R-77 missiles, among others, meaning they have become more versatile than any F-16 that's come before. So, the F-16 isn't going to be the silver bullet that leads to Ukraine winning the war. Anybody who thinks that's the case hasn't been paying attention to Ukraine's claims that it needs F-16s to create small pockets of aerial domination across the front lines. However, with these new upgrades, Ukraine has F-16s that pack the same offensive punch as always while being more capable of defending themselves against the weapons Russia is most commonly using to deal with aerial threats. And if the holy grail of electronic warfare systems can be added into that mix, we may see Ukraine's souped-up F-16s making massive dents into Putin's war efforts once more of them arrive. But what do you think about the strange F-16s Ukraine has received from its European allies?